presentation. So just to let you know, just to make you aware of that. I am Lisa Andrews, Director of Integrated Career Development for the School of Continuing Studies Professional Development Certificates. Welcome to Ace the Interview. I hope this gives you some good information, perhaps a boost of confidence as you approach interviews coming here in the spring. So let's go ahead and get started. So really the purpose of interviews, there are several purposes to an interview. Essentially, it's to see if a candidate is a good fit through information gathering. And as we all know, employers are hiring for three things: qualifications, motivation, and fit. And so the interview is an opportunity for employers to get information on all of those factors that go into their hiring. So the employer will be exploring a candidate's experience, determining their competency, learning about their motivation to apply, why us and not another company, and to really assess fit, or as I like to say, do you pass the attitude test with that organization? So what is the employer really looking for? Essentially your career story. I often tell people when I critique their resume that the resume is just a snapshot of what you've done. It doesn't have to be everything you've ever done in your career history. However, during an interview, everything is fair game. So even things that are not on your resume are perfect for you to talk about during an interview. And you can even preface it by saying, this isn't on my resume, but I think it really reflects the situation that you're asking me to describe. So I'm going to do that right now. But essentially, what are you passionate about? What are your strengths? What have you done so far in terms of skills, experience, even education? What would you like to do? And how can you add value to the company? All these kind of encompass your career story and help you to tell that to the employer to give them a better idea of assessing that qualifications, motivation, and fit. I would say that about 80% of an interview happens before the interview even starts, and that is with your preparation. Once the interview starts, all of that preparation comes into play. So it's important to really spend some time to prepare and to practice, because interviewing is a skill, just like riding a horse, learning a new language. If you don't practice it, you're going to lose it. So it's really important to prepare and practice before the interview actually happens. I know this kind of seems obvious, but it's important to know about yourself and what's on your resume. And the reason I say this is because you would be surprised. I hear this from clients all the time. What the employer will kind of cherry pick off your resume and want to know more about. So you've taken the time to write all those bullet statements, those power statements, really be able to dig into that with the employer and be prepared for anything. You never know what they're going to actually choose to talk about in a little bit more detail. So make sure you have stories for everything that's on your resume. You also want to research the industry, not just the employer, but the industry itself, because they may ask you things like, what do you think the current trends are in finance and that kind of thing? So you won't really be able to speak on that very intelligently, and just kind of know what's going on in the industry. So, read the Wall Street Journal a couple of weeks before the interview or the month before the interview, depending on how much lead time you have. Do some Googling, what's going on in marketing these days. Watch some, news channels and that kind of thing. See if you can find out kind of some stories that you can talk about or break the ice with the employer. And then, of course, you really want to research the job so that you can ask intelligent questions about what the job truly entails when you get to the part of the interview when they ask you, do you have any questions of us? So definitely review that job description. And most importantly, of course, I tell people all the time that job descriptions are written for people that do not exist. No one is going to have every single qualification on that job description. It's literally impossible for that to happen. But there may be potential areas of concern that you should be prepared to address. So there may be certain qualifications that they're asking you for that you really don't have. And so you need to be prepared for how to address those gaps in the work experience that they're asking you for. And of course, this goes without saying, research the company. And you could do this through their website, through Glassdoor. Their other websites kind of give you sort of insider information on the company and what they're all about. Because again, this will inform the questions you want to ask of the employer if you have any doubts that you want answered during the interview process. So there are many types of interviews, and I just want to briefly go through a couple of these. For example, phone interviews, and really these are kind of screening interviews. So generally, this is a first step. It's probably not going to be with a person you'll eventually be working with directly, either on your team or as a direct supervisor. These are most likely going to be human resources professionals, kind of people that are screening in order to get candidates onto the next level, which would involve the one-on-one interviews, the panel interviews, your virtual interviews, or your group interviews. So you should put the same amount of effort into these phone screens that you do in other types of interviews, but just know that this is your chance to make an initial impression on the person to get you to move forward. And of course, the challenge here, you can't see those visual cues, so you don't really know what the person is thinking kind of on the other side. But a positive is you can kind of spread your resume out over your table. You can have notes of things you want to make sure that you get across. You can have your list of questions. So that's of advantage to you. And of course, one-on-one and panel interviews, generally, you will be then speaking to people who are the decision maker, the ultimate decision makers, whether it be a manager that will eventually work with you or people on the team that will be a part of your work unit and that sort of thing. And so with a one-on-one, it's kind of obvious it's just you and the other person. With a panel, you may have representation from different parts of the company, many people that you may never even work with again if you get the job, but everyone kind of likes to throw their opinion in there. So a lot of companies will go with this panel interview style. Now, we're all living in the world of Zoom. We're on Zoom right now. So when you have a Zoom interview, really be aware of your environment and your tech setup. For example, your background. I'm using a blurred background right now. These are kind of very well accepted, very common. I would just say to make sure your background is neutral or blurred, or and that you are visible. So make sure you have good lighting. I purchased on Amazon, spent about $15 for my light. I can adjust the contrast. I can adjust the level of lighting. So just make sure you kind of preview that before you log on to your virtual interview. And make sure there are no distractions as well. I know I have a cat. Sometimes she likes to participate in meetings. Ideally, if you can lock up your animals. I also have a couple of cuckoo clocks that I stopped before this presentation began so that we don't have any outside distractions. So anytime you can sort of minimize all of that during those virtual interviews, the more professional you're going to look. And then these aren't as common. They are in the consulting industry, the group interviews. And this is where actually, and I know my nephew, he interviewed for BCG. He went through interviews like this with them, the consulting company, where several candidates are interviewing for the same position. And the employer is looking to see how you interact in a group setting. And not only that, they may even ask you, who would you hire? So they really kind of put you on the spot. But these are less common types of interviews, I would say, but they are out there. So there are several different interview approaches that an employer can take. The most common is the traditional interview, which is also called the behavioral interview. And so the questions you'll receive, we're going to talk about behavioral interviews today. It's a whole other presentation about case interviews, which are used in the consulting industry. And then stress interview questions. These are the types of questions such as that are kind of unanswerable, such as how many gas stations are there in the US? No one really knows for sure, I don't think. Maybe Google, I'm not sure, but these are questions that are designed to get a window into your thinking process not necessarily to reach an exact answer of, exactly how many gas stations there are in the US. These are designed to see essentially how you work under stress, how you would resolve a complex problem like that. So today we're really going to focus on behavioral interviews. And the theory behind a behavioral interview is that past experience or knowledge is a really accurate predictor of future performance. So this is where you're kind of providing proof of concept. So they're asking you for certain qualifications, motivation, fit. How can you prove that you did that in the past, and you can then translate that to what you can do for them in the future? So it really does bring out those real life experiences. You're telling real life stories from your background in order to get your point across. And these questions will usually start out with a phrase like, give me an example of, describe a time when, or tell me about a time when you X. So you'll know, it'll trigger in your mind up a behavioral question. I'm going to have to answer with specific behaviors that I executed in the past and talk about what the results were and how that applies to what they are asking me for. There are several sort of categories of qualifications that the employer is looking for in a candidate. These can be leadership, problem solving, taking the initiative, even failing. When I've been asked this question in interviews before, when did you try something and it just flopped? How did you deal with it? Be prepared for that as well, not just all what your strengths are and how you perform well, but how do you respond to failure? And then, of course, teamwork. This is a qualification that many employers are looking for. And again, I hate to sound like a broken record, but the employer is really assessing three things: qualifications, motivation, and fit. So let's break that down just a little bit more. In terms of qualifications, we have your basic skills. We have your knowledge, could come from your certificate program here at Georgetown, your undergrad program, a master's program, what have you. Definitely your experience, your accomplishments, but even your learning potential, and then the physical aspects of the job. Can you actually do the job? And then execution. So how would you actually perform on the job? And then motivation. What is your real interest in the position, in the company, in the industry? How motivated are you to really apply? Your work ethic, how much effort are you willing to put into this job? Are you truly motivated to do it? Your energy level, during an interview, you really want to convey that you want the job. So it's important to be energetic and to be enthusiastic when you're answering. Of course, you don't want to be histrionic and go over the top, but you definitely want to demonstrate you're interested in the job. Your compensation expectations, if asked. This is always a taboo topic for you to bring up during the question and answer period. But if asked, they would want to know your motivation for compensation. And then your career objectives and growth. You may get the where do you see yourself in 5 years question. So you want to think about what your motivation is for applying and how that fits into the larger picture. And then fit, I call this, passing the attitude test, essentially. It's kind of very sort of organic, not something that you can force. Are you likable? Is there kind of chemistry between you and the panel or the interviewer? What are your communication skills? What are your values? What are your work values? What's your work style? What's your management style if you're being hired for a managerial position? What are your general interests? What do you like to do outside the office? And then, of course, what's your dress and appearance? There's a lot of talk about this. There's a lot of literature about this, about conforming to corporate standards, let's say. You want to read the room. I would say in an interview, I think you want to dress formally. And then when you get the job, you can wear a polo shirt or, your pajamas or, whatever the work environment asks of you. But I do think when you are interviewing, you should go formal and then go with whatever it is that they want to do. And, certain industries are definitely more strict and conservative than others. And again, there's a lot of talk about this, about hairstyles and that kind of thing. You're interviewing for Goldman Sachs. Do you want to have purple hair? I don't know. I don't know how flexible Goldman Sachs has become, but years ago, there was sort of a type that you had to fit into. Do you fit the suit? Flexibility and adaptability, these are two qualities that employers are also assessing. How willing are you to deal with ambiguity on the job? So there are a lot of different topics that they can cover in behavioral interviews. Here are a few of the potential topics that seem to come up over and over again. Leadership, for example, your teamwork skills, how you deal with conflict. They may ask you if it's a managerial position, when did you have a difficult employee? How did you deal with it? That's a very common question for a manager. Your influencing skills, ambiguity, as I mentioned a minute ago, how do you deal with that? Are you comfortable with ambiguity, or do you need things to be really planned out and direct? Your resilience. So the company has an economic downturn. How are you going to respond to that? Your problem solving experience. And that has to do with sometimes those stress questions, or just a general behavioral question that asks you how you solved a problem. And then project management as well. It seems to be kind of a theme in the workplace now, that it's very project-based, very team-based. So how have you dealt with that in the past? So how do you answer these questions? And I like to use the STAR method. Many of you have probably heard about this method. It's been around forever, but it really does it's a way to really frame your answers and give an effective response. And STAR stands for situation, task, action, and result. So let's run through this. So here's a STAR method example. Tell me about a time when you took the initiative. So the situation. During our last marketing meeting, our manager assigned us to a new client. The task. My team had to develop a marketing strategy for a nonprofit organization. The action. I took the initiative and became the group leader. I delegated tasks, scheduled our bi-weekly meeting, and kept the team on track. So you're even using the word initiative. That's even better. And result. We completed our project and presented our marketing strategy to the company. The client signed with our agency. So kind of short to the point. You can certainly expand a little bit on each of these points. You don't have to say the words, well, the situation was, and the task was, and the actions I took, but you can certainly frame it in that way, maybe wording it a little differently so you're not being kind of obvious that you're using the STAR method. But this is a way, again, to kind of frame your answers. So just some kind of overall tips about interviewing. You want to try to make connections for the interview. And what I mean by that is, you're applying for this job, you're interviewing for X job. And remember, behavioral interviews have to do with talking about past experience and relating that to what the employer is actually hiring for. And you need to make that connection for the interviewer. Don't leave it to chance and let the interview try to fit you into the box they're looking to fill. So you need to say something like, I understand you're looking for someone with really, really strong communication skills. Let me talk to you about how my presentation skills in the past can really benefit your company. So always sort of refocus the conversation on how you will make their bottom line increase, or how you will help advance the goals of that company, okay? So you want to make the connection for the employer. Don't leave it to chance. So make sure that you're really communicating the fact that you are the best person for this job, and this is why. Now, you do want to keep it concise. You want to tell your story, of course, but you don't want to dominate the interview. You don't want to sort of go on and on off on tangents and that kind of thing. So I always say it's okay to have a notebook or a Padfolio with you where you write down a couple of bullet points, maybe for each competency you've identified that you think the employer may ask about. Perfectly okay to have this in front of you and then refer to it. And you don't want to read your answers directly, but definitely, have some kind of talking points that will trigger your memory, and then you'll be able to respond properly. You want to talk in concrete terms. So I would avoid the use of cliches, the use of, stories that aren't yours. You really want to talk in with real numbers, real experiences, your real background, and really, again, relating that to what they are looking for. I say here, think, don't jump to an answer. I know my tendency is I don't really like silence very much. And I think that's really kind of a human tendency to just immediately when the question is asked to just start blabbering. I think it's really important to take a few seconds to really think about and formulate your answer before you actually start talking. And again, this is where your notebook can come in handy. You can jot down a few things that you'd like to address. You could ask them, can you repeat the question? Just to give yourself a little bit of time to formulate your answer before you start speaking. Also, you want to formulate your presentation from the best example. So really what this translates to is answer the question that was asked. A lot of us sort of are semi-listening to a person talking to us. We're really trying to think of what we want to say and not really answer what they're asking of us. Really important to answer the question that is being asked. So really important to be attentive, pay attention, to the employer and what they are asking you, and make sure that you are providing the best example to demonstrate an answer, the most proper answer to what it is that they are asking you for. So that is really important. There is time at the end for question and answer. And that can be a time when you bring in a story that you really wanted to tell, but you didn't get a chance to. And finally, present with confidence. And as they say in Texas, if you've done it, it ain't bragging. This is a time for you to toot your horn. I know many people are uncomfortable with talking about themselves, about touting their accomplishments. The interview is not the time to be humble. This is really your time to demonstrate you are the best person for this job. So present yourself with confidence and present the fact that you truly are the best person for the job, and this is why. So some body language tips, and this still applies on Zoom as well. Posture. You want a neutral posture, but you also want a confident posture as well. So sit a little forward. Make sure that you're not kind of laying back in your chair, slouching. You really want to have that really confident and forward posture. I have these huge eyes here. Eye contact is really important. A lack of eye contact indicates a lack of trust on the employer's part. So you do want to give them eye contact. What I recommend when you're using Zoom is do not use the gallery view, use the speaker view. We're in gallery view right now where I can see some of you. When you use speaker view, it's more of an illusion of you looking into their eyes. When it's gallery view, you're next to each other. So you're kind of looking off to the left or to the right. So you're not really giving eye contact, and it's distracting to look into the camera when you're on gallery view. So when you're in speaker view, you're almost giving them direct eye contact. Fidgeting. This is something that when you practice interviewing with someone else, they can give you feedback on how often you move, how often you fidget, and that kind of thing. And of course, you want to minimize this as much as possible. And in the days when we actually shook hands, you want to have a firm handshake. As you can see here, but you don't want, there's two things that you don't want. You don't want to give someone the death grip, okay, where you're squeezing their hand so hard that it hurts. And you also you don't want to give them what I call the dead fish either. We're just kind of like limping your hand forward. You really just want to give a nice firm handshake. And in terms of pace, now I tend to talk fast, as you probably have gathered, but you want to try to, make sure your pace is even. It's of a moderate pace, so you're not rushing through your answer, but you're also not sounding like you're not confident enough where you're sort of plodding through your answer either. You want to, again, when you practice, you can practice with pace. Ask the person you're practicing with or doing a mock interview with, how is my pace? Am I speaking too fast or too slow, or is it just about right? Filler words. These are filler words you want to try to avoid. And again, we do these sort of, without really thinking, and we're not really necessarily aware of them unless we record ourselves or we're working with a partner to do a mock interview and we practice. So the more you practice, the less filler words you're actually going to have when you practice your answers. Now, again, you don't want to sound rehearsed, but if you can avoid filler words, it makes you sound a lot more confident. And hand gestures. Now, I'm Italian, and so you've seen my hands a lot during this presentation. I would say hand gestures can be somewhat distracting, and I do try to minimize those when I'm in an interview situation. It's hard for me to do so, and I really just think it's okay if it's making your point come across, but try not to be too histrionic or dramatic with your hand gestures. So they're okay in moderation. Okay. Now, one thing I did not mention at the top of this presentation, but that is extremely important to remember, and if you remember nothing else about this presentation, remember this. Interviews are a two-way street. You are interviewing them as much as they are interviewing you. So know that. So in the part of the interview, when the employer says, do you have any questions of us? Kind of the death knell of any interview is for you to say no. You always, always, always want to have questions. And why is that? Because of just what I said. Interviewing is a two-way street. We spend more of our time at work than we do at home in our leisure time. So isn't this a place where you want to be and want to look forward to Mondays as well as you look forward to Fridays? Since you're going to be spending most of your time there, you really, really want to use the interview process as a way to gauge how much you are interested in the position. You've applied to a job description, but now it's coming to life. And truly, is it what they talked about in the job description? Or are you getting the vibe that it's something completely different? And is that okay with you? So remember, it's a two-way street. So you should have about 10 questions prepared, but depending on time, you may only get to ask between 2 and 5. Now, of course, you don't want to waste time asking questions that you could have learned about on the firm's website. So you want to ask questions that you can't find on the firm's website. And again, as it says here, the best questions demonstrate you're seeking an alignment between qualifications, motivation, and fit. So just as much as they're assessing your attitude, do you pass the attitude test? You need to assess then, do they pass the attitude test for you? One question you always want to ask, and generally at the end, is about next steps, if they haven't already explained it. So what are the next steps in the interview process? And hopefully they will say, hey, after this round, we're going to have a second round, at which time you'll be meeting with Mr. So-and-so, Mrs. So-and-so. And at that point, we'll be reviewing all the applications and making final offers, okay? So you definitely want to get a handle on what the next steps are in the interview process. So if you're stumped right now about what questions to ask, here are some suggestions. I would suggest asking about the company culture. Once again, you're trying to assess that attitude at the company, like what's it really like to work there. You can ask them about their work environment. You can ask for a tour. If you go into an office to interview and they take you into like a conference room, ask them, can we walk around? Can you show me the rest of the office? So you can get kind of a vibe. You're really kind of think of yourself as like a judge. You're kind of judging the situation, judging the work environment. Do people look happy? Is it real quiet? Or are people socializing? You know, you want to try to get the vibe, pick up the vibe of the organization. You want to ask about hierarchy and workload assignments. So, you know, is it kind of wind up the top and let it go in terms of work situations or work environments? Or workload assignments, or is it very much of a micromanaged situation where you're given a task and then the manager is heavily involved? You want to kind of assess that, and does that environment appeal to you? And then succession plan. I think this is really important to know, is this a dead-end job, or is there a plan for me to move up? Is there opportunity for advancement in this job? And then, you know, they asked you the 5-year plan, like what's your plan in 5 years? Does it fit into that? And then, of course, what I mean here by salary performance reviews is the taboo subject is salary. You never want to bring up salary. You always let them lead and bring up salary. And I am doing a salary negotiation webinar later on in the semester. But what you can ask is this: how often are salary levels reviewed? Is it during the performance review cycle? Is it every 6 months? Is it never? Is this it? Is this my salary for the next 10 years? So you want to ask about, you know, at what time and how often salaries are and performances are reviewed. And last, after the interview isn't over when the interview ends, you absolutely must send a thank you email. Now, I'm also a proponent of thank you notes. However, unfortunately, the Postal Service is somewhat reliable, so they may not get the thank you note until, you know, 4 to 5 days after the interview. So an email is probably the most efficient way to thank them. And in the thank you note, you really want to, you know, not just thank you for the interview, I hope to hear from you shortly, but really you can build it out a little bit. You know, what your understanding is of the job needs and expectations, maybe even a couple of brief sentences about how you fit into that, again, kind of reinforcing what you said during the interview. And definitely say, you know, I continue to be interested in this position. Now, this is interesting. Let's say you go through the interview process and you're thinking to yourself, I'm not touching this job with a 10-foot pole. That doesn't mean you still can't have gratitude for them taking the time to interview you. So you can say something like, you know, thank you for taking the time to interview me for the data analyst position. At this time, I'm going to I really appreciate, you know, our conversation, a couple of more sentences. And then at this time, I'm going to be pursuing other opportunities, so I will not be moving forward in the hiring process. So you can let them down easy as well, but always be grateful, because let's not forget, most industries are pretty small towns. So you don't want to necessarily burn a bridge by not sending a thank you note and just ghosting someone. I think it's important to be honest. So always be grateful, no matter if you're going to take the position or not, but be honest as well. And then while you wait, be available. So clear your schedule in case they do schedule a quick follow-up interview, and make sure you're checking your email and voicemail often and responding right away. So within a day. On the voicemail, make sure that your voicemail is neutral. You can use your own voice, but you don't want anything too casual. So make sure it is professional. And if others are answering the phone for you, this is more when we were in the days of landlines, but if by chance any other people are answering the phone for you, please let them know to take a detailed message so that you can respond in turn. Now, if you're rejected, you really want to use rejection as an opportunity, because remember, there could be many other factors outside of your control. It's really not you, it's them. And indeed, a rejection can be a blessing in disguise. It just wasn't the right fit. You know, and the employers are generally pretty good at assessing that, or it just, you didn't have the key qualification they were looking for or something like that. So, you know, it could just be a factor outside your control. On the other hand, they could have an internal candidate that they decided to just promote. So there could be factors that are well beyond your control. But when you receive that rejection letter, in your response, you can still say, what impressed you about the company or their department, and indicate you do want to keep in touch and would like to be considered for future openings. So again, still important to have that gratitude, but acknowledging what possibly went wrong. You can also ask for feedback if you feel comfortable doing so. Just wondering, what feedback you can give me on our interview or what I could have done differently. Perfectly within your power to do so. I want to encourage you to connect with us at Professional Development Certificates. Our tweet handle is there. Follow us on Instagram. I've got some pretty funny reels you can check out. So I'd encourage you to do that. And now I'm going to got my Calendly link here. If any of you are interested in doing a mock interview with me, I would be more than happy to do that with you. So you can go to my Calendly link and schedule something, and we can do a mock interview if you have an interview coming up. You can email me as well with any questions that you didn't want to ask here at this presentation. What I'm going to do now is stop the recording.